There are many things that can sway someone's opinion on a game. A deal breaker for one person might be what makes the game great to another. Typically, whether or not I enjoy a game boils down to 5 main sections: story, characters, combat, exploration or side stuff, and music. Not necessarily in that order. Now, without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on The Legend of Zelda: Phantom Hourglass. Phantom Hourglass is yet another DS game I am covering that was released on June 23rd in 2007. So not only are we covering DS games, but we're just getting progressively older. Phantom Hourglass is a direct sequel to Wind Waker, and that's the other reason why I'm playing it outside of it being a DS game. Phantom Hourglass was actually one of my very first experiences with the Legend of Zelda series. However, I was actually never really a huge fan of this game as a kid, and I actually much preferred its sequel, Spirit Tracks. Despite that, I am willing to give Phantom Hourglass one more try to prove its worth to me, so entertain me, Jester. But yeah, let's get into it. Our story begins with some cardboard cutouts. Nico, you guys remember Nico? How could we forget Nico and his stupid freaking obstacle courses? Anyways, Nico's putting on a little show, giving us the very simplified recap of what happened in Wind Waker. Link is, of course, asleep during all of this because it ain't a game in this series if we don't start off dead to the world. Well, we wake up, we tell Nico his show was awesome, and the ship is enveloped in a thick fog. We learn about the ghost ship that is haunted and cursed and has supposedly been causing shipwrecks and missing person cases and all sorts of nasty stuff. Now, Tetra, who, if you don't remember her, she's the captain of the pirate crew, and also Zelda, thinks the ghost ship is a sham and that there must be tons of treasure on it. So when our ship gets close enough to the ghost ship, she jumps onto it despite everyone being like, I don't think that's a good idea. Gotta love our headstrong girl. A couple seconds later, we hear a scream. It was in fact a bad idea, so Link tries to follow her but ends up falling overboard when trying to jump to the ghost ship. He wakes up to a glittering ball of light all up in his face, and she turns out to be a fairy with lost memories by the name of Ciela. She takes us to see her grandfather, Oshus, in hopes that he will be able to help us locate the ghost ship to save Tetra. Oshus, of course, like any responsible adult would, tells us it's too dangerous and to stay on Mersey Island where we are. Ciela helps us disregard this advice because she's worried about Tetra, so we steal Oshus' sword, he finds out and teaches us how to use it, and then we're off to town. In town, we learn about a place called the Temple of the Ocean King that supposedly has clues about how to find the ghost ship. Apparently, a captain of a ship named Linebeck went there in search of clues, but he hasn't been seen in a while. So we make our way to the temple and we meet this Linebeck guy who managed to trap himself in the temple like an idiot. Linebeck is by far one of the most memorable characters in this game. He's cowardly, but he's also very arrogant and boisterous. He makes himself seem very big, and it comes across as incredibly comedic, but also borderline annoying. Linebeck claims he has a twisted ankle, so he can't look for the sea chart or free himself. But the minute we free him, he hightails it out of there because he tells us the temple actually will drain your life force if you're not standing on one of the purple safe zones. So with that amazing news in our minds, we keep searching the temple and we end up finding a sea chart that will guide us to the Temple of Fire where the Spirit of Power resides. Ciela accuses Linebeck of being a big ol' coward, but of course he denies it and keeps going on about his twisted ankle. But with the help of Oshus, we do manage to convince Linebeck to let us travel with him. It's a win-win because Linebeck doesn't have to do any of the dirty work, and we have a way to get to the ghost ship. So we head to the marked island, the Island of Ember. There we meet the fortune teller Astrid, and she tells us how to get into the Temple of Fire. Now, funny little anecdote, I mentioned already that I wasn't a huge fan of Phantom Hourglass when I was a kid, and I think part of that is because my youngest brother loved Phantom Hourglass, so I never really got to play it because it lived in his DS. Now, my brother was very, very small during this time. Like, not like physically, just like he was young, so he was small. So while he liked the game, he didn't really have the cognitive function to do a lot of the puzzles in the game. So my older sister would just get stuck doing them for him, like the angel she is. Now the problem was, my brother would restart the game so frequently that my sister had to redo the fire temple for him like every other day. She actually had the patience of a saint, guys. It got to the point where she could clear it so fast. She did time herself, but I do not remember what her fastest time was, and I don't want to misrepresent her by guessing. So yeah, for anyone wondering, I cleared it in 20 minutes or so, and I felt that was pretty quick. Anyways, once we kill the boss in the fire temple, we meet the spirit of power, Leaf, which allows us to access more of the temple of the Ocean King, and we finally gain access to the Phantom Hourglass. The sands in the hourglass give us a certain amount of time that we can stay in the temple without draining our life force. Yay! With that power, we're able to acquire another sea chart in order to get to the island of Gust. Unfortunately, we run into a little problem when trying to travel to the Northwestern Sea, that being the ghost ship. We try to follow it, but we end up getting enveloped in this spooky fog that will not let us pass. Luckily, on an island nearby, we learn about an explorer who uncovered the secret of how to get through the fog, so we just copy his route and away we go. It sucks that the ghost ship kinda just acts like an obstacle though, because once we go on the correct path, it completely disappears. I kind of like the thought of the ghost ship being that much of a troll that it just like waits by the rocks for unsuspecting sailors, but then doesn't attack them in any way. It just like won't let them pass. Like, you're not in any danger, you're just not allowed to go up to this sea. If you have family up there, sucks to be you. After we make it to the island of Gust, we get access to the Wind Temple with the help of the shovel and the bomb bag that we acquire. I actually found the Wind Temple to be easier than the Fire Temple. I feel like I cleared it in no time flat, and then I was off back to Mersey Island with Neri, the Spirit of Wisdom, in tow. I will say that at this point, I started to remember why the Temple of the Ocean King is a little tedious, because despite having cleared the first like 5 floors already, I do have to redo everything. The game makes it a little easier by giving you access to shortcuts using the items you didn't previously have, like the bombs and the shovel in this case, but it still is a little annoying. I managed to clear everything obviously because I'm awesome, but then I got to the part that had the sea chart, and the game told me to press the map to my sea chart. I immediately clocked that I was supposed to close the DS, but guys, I was playing on a 2DS and those don't close. So I was like, oh shit, is this game like not playable on 2DS? I spent like 5 minutes trying to just bark it on my map because I figured I'd find it eventually, but I had to actually press it on, otherwise the fairies wouldn't let me leave. I did end up looking it up, and it turns out if you literally just put the 2DS on sleep mode, that's considered closing the DS. And I felt pretty stupid for not like realizing that, but you learn, you live, you learn. Unlike the other two, this map doesn't actually lead us to the island where the spirit is, but instead to a mark on the map in the middle of the ocean. Luckily, we find out that Edo over on Cannon Island, he made our ship's cannon, I just didn't mention him because it wasn't that relevant yet, has come up with a new invention that allows you to pull treasure up from the bottom of the sea floor. Nifty and very convenient. So of course we go to get this beautiful contraption. Unfortunately for me, I had spent all my rupees on other stuff like right before this, so I did have to spend like 20 minutes farming cash before I could buy the salvage arm. The purchase of the salvage arm itself is also really funny because the way Edo determines the price is he has Link tell him how much he wants it by the player having to scream into the mic. And seeing as this is a children's game, I feel like this is the ultimate like rage bait by Nintendo. Like, you're just in the back seat and you suddenly scream so that your salvage arm doesn't cost 1,000 rupees. And then guess what? Now your mom is incredibly mad at you and probably had a heart attack at the sound of her child screaming in the back seat for literally no reason. And honestly, that's very funny to me. Excellent design choice. I screamed so loud that my salvage arm cost 200 rupees. Seeing as I live in an apartment with neighbors that don't like noise, I was not willing to try to make it any cheaper than that. So yeah, 200 rupees it was. Once we had the salvage arm, we are able to head to the place on the map that's marked, and Linebeck is the one who's like, oh, maybe there's something at the bottom of the sea, because he can be helpful sometimes. And I wish I recorded this part, guys, because Linebeck admits that he can't swim, And guys, what kind of ship captain can't swim at all? He better be joking. Like, what does he do if the boat sinks? He just, like, dies? Anyways, we managed to acquire the Sun Key through salvaging. I almost broke my salvage arm because I got confused while I was recording again, which would have been hilarious if I actually broke it because, wow, this newly acquired salvage arm that I paid 200 rupees for that I just broke on my first try. But yeah, I didn't break it, and now we can use the Sun Key to access the door we previously saw on Molita Island, which was the island that had the secret on how to pass through the ghost ship's fog. The Sun Key ends up leading us to the back forest area of Molita Island that we couldn't access before, and it's also where the Temple of Courage is. Now, I had a bad feeling about this temple because there was an eye motif happening, and an eye motif only means one thing, that we're gonna get the bow and arrow. And you know, guys, I was being a little overdramatic because while the bow mechanics in Wind Waker truly did scar me, the ones in this game were not that bad. I did find the Temple of Courage to be the most difficult so far. Like, I actually did almost die in this temple, and I spent like a good quarter of it with a half heart left. But as it turns out, it wasn't actually that hard. I was just being stupid. I also had a tendency, once I had a lot of hearts, to just like tank a lot of damage just because I could, so I kind of set myself up for failure. I realized up until this point, I haven't really been talking about the bosses, and the main reason for that is because they've been pretty easy and not really worth mentioning up until this point. I did like the designs of the bosses. I'll put them up in order from left to right: Fire Temple, Wind Temple, and Courage Temple. The thing that I did like about the Courage Temple boss was they actually go invisible, and the way to figure out where they are is that the top DS screen becomes the boss's point of view, so we know when it's in front of us so we can hit it with an arrow. I mention this because while I will talk about it more in depth in the gameplay section, I do think it's really cool how much Phantom Hourglass utilizes the DS mechanics. Now, as is normal, after we beat the boss, we obtain the Spirit of Courage, but unlike the other two, this one is not talking at all and looks exactly like Ciela. Ooh, what a mystery. After we leave the temple and return to Linebeck's ship, Oshus meets us, which is very mysterious, seeing as there's no other boat in sight. But he tells us that Ciela is actually the Spirit of Courage, and what we saved was her powers and memories that she lost. So they merge back together, and luckily one of her powers is the ability to sense evil, so she resonates with the other two spirits, and we're able to find the ghost ship at last. Linebeck asks Oshus who he really is, because Linebeck, like me, is suspicious of him. Like, how did this old man happen to save a spirit and happen to travel to an island without a boat? I know the answer to this already because outside of Linebeck, Ciela and Oshus's true identities are the only two other things I remembered about this game. But I do like the way the game starts to move the key players into the limelight at this point. Not quite telling us exactly what's going on, but starting to plant the seeds of what's to come. You know, foreshadowing. After that, Ciela is able to use her powers to take us to the ghost ship where we find Tetra, but it can never be that easy, so of course Tetra is a statue because her life force was drained out of her. Side note, but the boss that we have to fight is these weird demon sisters, and when we fight them, because this game is geared towards smaller kids, they actually explain that in the fight they use Dead Man's Volley, and we have to hit their balls of light back and forth. And if any of you were around for my Wind Waker video, you might remember that for the Dead Man's Volley boss fight, I didn't know what I was doing, and I just dodged the balls of light, and I was very confused, so I appreciated being told point blank this time. Maybe I am the target demographic for this game. Side note about that Oshus appears again on the ghost ship, which, come on, no boat, he just shows up, and he reveals to us his true identity as the Ocean King. Makes a lot of sense. As it turns out, the Oshus we know did the exact same thing Ciela did and split himself into two, and his other half is trapped in the temple of the Ocean King, along with Bellum, the evil life-draining force that has been acting as a parasite on the life force of the Ocean King and the people for years. We are told to head to Zhaoz's island in order to uncover the secret of how to go further into the temple of the Ocean King. Unfortunately, I turned my game off between the ghost ship and Zhaoz's island, and I forgot where they told me to go. So I ended up doing the entire Temple of the Ocean King again before realizing that wasn't where I was supposed to be. And then after I unlocked the secret from Zhaoz, I had to go back and do it all again. Yeah, Temple of the Ocean King, my beloved. Zhaoz also tells us that he can craft us an evil-killing sword, but we need 3 pure metals, hence why we need to go back to the Temple of the Ocean King. Fortunately, you do hit a midpoint in the temple, but unfortunately, it took me way longer than normal to reach the midpoint because I stupidly got hit by a phantom, so it saved my worst time as the cost to teleport, but I was not in the mood to repeat the entire section for a 3rd time, so we just went with the worst time. It's fine. I managed to get both sea charts in one go, but barely. I used all my stand of hours and both my potions, and I still made it to the bottom floor with only like 3 hearts to spare. It was stressful. Once I had the sea charts, I decided to head to the Southeastern Sea, and I just stopped on the first island I saw, which is the Goron Island. Guys, I love the Gorons. Linebeck tells us that he smells treasure on the island, so we go to meet the Gorons and find out that one of the pure metals is in fact on the island. We end up having to join the Goron tribe, but Gongoron, the little kid Goron that is tasked with taking us up to the Goron temple where the pure metal resides, rejects us. He's like, no, you're not a real Goron. So yeah, then in the temple, he needs help, and when we help him, he's real quick to switch up his tune. I actually did really enjoy the Goron Temple. It was my favorite so far because it was the first companion dungeon where we got to control 2 characters, similarly to the Wind and Earth Temples in Wind Waker, and it's honestly one of my favorite mechanics in dungeons. Gongoron helps us get to the Crimsonine, and then he vouches for us to the Elder, and we get to leave the island with the pure metal and go in search of the next one. Really, the only other island there is to visit is the weird one surrounded by ice, so of course we have to go there and shoot the ice with our cannon so we can gain access to the island, obviously. The inhabitants of the island are called the Anuki, and they live in fear of the Yuk, these like Yeti guys. In order to gain access to the Ice Temple, we have to solve the mystery of the invading Yuk, which is just like a simple riddle, like one of them's lying, which one is it? Once we do that, we do gain access to the Ice Temple and we get the grappling hook. And I feel like this temple was the hardest so far, not because the difficulty increased, but because I just became dumber. I feel like sometimes when they get to the point where I have a bunch of different tools, I forget what I have and what I can do with them. Bombs? Who's she? That was so 3 dungeons ago. The boss of the temple is a 2-headed dragon, and funny story, I died to this boss the first time I tried it, so I turned the game off and went to sleep because it was late, and came back to it the next day. I only had a limited amount of time to play the game, which was fine because I beat the boss first try, and I got the Azurnine, and then I found a bunch of treasure and everything was great. Then one of the Yuks told me about an island called Harrow Island that was to the west. So naturally I went there and there's like this digging mini game where you can dig up either really cool prizes or rupors that make you lose rupees. You only get 10 tries to dig, and if you try to dig past that, the Boingo stone running the game will penalize you by taking away 100 rupees. And then if you keep going, they'll take away all the rupees you have. Guys, I lost over 1,000 rupees to satiate my curiosity because I just wanted to know if he was actually going to do something if I kept digging. So I kept digging. Of course, I wasn't going to let that stand. Like, I can't like just lose all my rupees. So I reloaded my game, but I had not saved the entire play session. So I had to do the Ice Temple boss again. 3rd time, the charm. After the Ice Temple, I wasn't too sure where to go to get the 3rd pure metal, so I decided to just head to the Northeastern Sea, the only one I hadn't been to yet, and the only island I could access right away was the Island of the Dead. On the Island of the Dead, we learn about King Muto, the Cobble Kingdom, and his 4 knights. We're able to acquire the King's Necklace, which lets us access the Island of Ruin. Like, I vaguely recalled all the way up to the Anuki and the Ice Temple, but this part of the game to the end I had zero recollection of from past playthroughs, so I guess we know where I dropped the game most of the time, which is kind of sad because I did almost make it to the end as a kid. I was really hoping that once I finally accessed the temple where King Muto was, it wouldn't be an actual dungeon just because I had to do so much prerequisite stuff just to get there, but that was just wishful thinking, y'all, because there was a dungeon. I really was starting to feel the burnout at this point with this game too, but I could sense I was close to the end, so I kept chugging along. After we finish the King Muto temple, we finally get the last pure metal and subsequently the Master Sword, and then we are finally able to head to the Temple of the Ocean King to do it all again. We gain access to Bellum, we kick his butt and save Tetra, but of course it wouldn't be a final boss if they didn't fake us out. So Bellum kidnaps Tetra again, and we actually have to fight him again because he faked being dead. So Linebeck mans the ship and we chase after Bellum, who possessed the ghost ship. Once we catch up, we can finally board so we can save Tetra again. But then, in a shocking turn of events, Link gets snatched up, and in a moment of courage, Linebeck saves us, leading to him getting possessed by Bellum, and we have to fight him as the final boss. We beat him, but not before he sinks Linebeck's ship and just wreaks general havoc. But we do beat Bellum, and so we save Tetra and we save Linebeck, and then we find out that Oshus is really a whale. That's his true form. Linebeck gets his ship back, and we all just live happily ever after, and life's great. I'm being very flippant at the moment, but I do have to say that this game really did nail the ending. It was a very nice culmination of everyone's personalities, a heartfelt goodbye between Ciela and Linebeck and Link, and just the right amount of comedy to just top it all off. I really did enjoy the ending. I have always thought that one of Zelda's biggest strengths is the unique personalities you interact with throughout each game. I'm going to talk more about my culmination of thoughts on the game after going through everything, but I didn't really like this game, guys. I didn't not like it. I found it to be a very middle-of-the-pack game, so I don't want to give too negative an impression when I say this, but I think Phantom Hourglass lacking interesting characters was a detriment to my enjoyment of the game. A lot of the side characters like Astrid, Jolene and Joanne, and Gongaron do have interesting designs, unique personalities, and are fun to be around in the moment in which they are relevant, but due to the limitations of the game being both targeted at younger children as well as being on the DS, it makes everything feel very snappy. We go to a place, we earn access to the dungeon very quickly, we solve the dungeon, and we leave. And we never have to see or go back to any of those islands. It's not conducive to giving us a meaningful connection with any of the characters or even the environment for that matter, but I will talk more about that in the side quests and exploration section. Now, in feeling that way, I thought a lot about why I enjoyed Wind Waker so much and not Phantom Hourglass when they do work with a very similar template, and I think character-wise, the reason why Wind Waker works is being incentivized to go back. On every island, there were so many things to find, see, do, and so many things you could unlock just by talking to people. Whereas Phantom Hourglass has very few islands that actually act as the kind of hubs that Windfall, Outset, and Dragon Roost Island act as, just to name a few. Generally, in Phantom Hourglass, each island is kind of limited to one building, and that's it. So without much reason to go back, combined with very little time spent with side characters in the first place, makes Phantom Hourglass feel distinctly less full than Wind Waker. Now, let's swing back to the positives for a second. I think Linebeck himself is a fantastic character. His character growth is very subtle. As I mentioned, he starts off very arrogant and boisterous, overcompensating for what we later learn is actually a very cowardly person beneath the surface. Still, despite his absolute refusal to do anything remotely dangerous throughout the entire journey, he still steps up against Bellum and saves us when it counts. I also think his relationship with Ciela was very well done because I think they act very much as foil characters. Ciela is similarly loud and boisterous like Linebeck is, less so on the arrogant part, but she comes more from a place of righteousness with her loudness. Like, she wants credit to be placed where credit's due, versus Linebeck, whose sole intention is to make himself look better than he actually is. Needless to say, they play off each other very well, and I think their relationship with one another is actually what makes them so memorable, versus necessarily their interactions with Link. On a fundamental level, because Link is a silent protagonist, you do need bigger personalities to fill the silence he leaves, and I do think that Linebeck and Ciela do that incredibly well in this game. As touched upon previously, the entire basis to what makes this game's combat and gameplay exciting is it very much utilizes all of the functions that are unique to the DS. The combat and item usage is completely touch or stylus based. A lot of different puzzles use drawing mechanics, closing the DS, blowing into the mic, and other things that are only done because this game is on the DS. I do really enjoy when games utilize the system they're on in a full capacity, and I do really feel as though Phantom Hourglass executed that really well. But I also did find there was an added challenge to the combat being completely stylus based. I very often found myself accidentally auto-pathing Link, slashing instead of tapping, using a copious amount of arrows because I thought I unselected it but I didn't. The game itself wasn't difficult enough that any of that hindered me really, but truly this game was not for the fat of finger. I touched briefly on the dungeons as I was talking about going to each one, and I actually did want to do a dungeon ranking video originally for Phantom Hourglass, but I didn't really keep any notes for each dungeon for one. And looking back on it with my old reliable memory, I didn't really find any of the dungeons to stand out to me over all the rest of them, outside of the Temple of the Ocean King, which I loathed. Each one essentially introduced a new mechanic, all the puzzles centered around that mechanic, and then we fought the boss and that was it. None of the puzzles really stood out to me as rewarding or well designed, nothing was very challenging. Admittedly, I did get stuck a couple times in the late game simply because I got to the point where I had so many items that I just forgot which would be the one I needed for that particular issue, as I mentioned earlier. But that's again because of my rat brain, not because anything was new or particularly difficult. It's actually really interesting that I had so much trouble getting into this game despite just playing Bowser's Inside Story and also covering Kirby's Epic Yarn, both games which are intended for a younger audience, but I loved and sang the praises of in my videos. And I think really the underlying issue is the type of game Zelda is. When I think about Legend of Zelda, I think of a more open adventure puzzle game. The original Zelda was very open-ended, you were literally not given much direction and you could just go anywhere, and the only direction you had was just if you went there and you died, it was probably too hard for what you had. While none of the Zelda games up until Breath of the Wild were truly fully open world, every single one gives you the freedom to explore at your own pace. I enjoy being challenged by Zelda games, by puzzles and bosses, and figuring out how to make things work, and that was what was really lacking in Phantom Hourglass, more so than the characters that made it a slog for me. And again, this is not a fault of the game itself, because while I also didn't love the game as a kid, I definitely found it way more engaging than I do now. But again, this is just a result of me not being in the target age demographic for the game, and also having a different expectation for the kind of game Legend of Zelda is versus, you know, a platformer or an RPG. Outside of the main game itself, there actually were quite a few things to see and do in this game. There were a number of uncharted islands that you could go to that hosted things like minigames, side quests, and upgrades. My favorite thing was the treasure arm minigame to rescue treasure from the sunken seafloor, and I really liked that it was an actual minigame in this game, unlike in Wind Waker. I didn't end up going back to get all the treasure charts like I did in Wind Waker, but I did get most of the treasures whose charts I found naturally while playing the game, and it was always a fun time. Not to mention, every sunken treasure was a chance to get a ship part. The ship parts are truly what show that I didn't do nearly as much exploring as I should have, because I barely had any, but I did love decorating my ship. It was the one thing in the game that I actually heavily considered going back to 100%, but then I remembered how life drained I felt while playing the game, and I reconsidered. Sometimes we don't need to 100% games, guys. I'm a chronic completionist, so I need to remind myself of that every once in a while. Like the ship parts, you could also collect power, wisdom, and courage gems in order to get various upgrades, but I only found enough of and bothered to go back for the first power upgrade, and it ended up being that I could choose to give my sword the power of fire, which I never did. I did have enough wisdom gems that I could have gotten that upgrade as well, but I never ended up sailing back to the island. There were a few minigames that you could also partake in. There's the few that I've mentioned already, the treasure minigame, and the one that you had to dig to like find stuff. The digging minigame, I honestly had the most atrocious luck with it, so I came out in the negative every time, so I just gave up on it. There were also various traveler ships that you could find, and one of them had a minigame where you had to hit someone continuously without getting hit 3 times yourself. It's exactly like the game in Wind Waker, and I found it to be so much more difficult in this game. I still got to the required 100 to get the gem, but I did not want to go beyond that. I mentioned Jolene by name earlier, but I didn't really talk about who she is, but she's Limebeck's ex who likes to dress up as a pirate, and she will sail the high seas searching for your blood. She has a sister, Joanne, who likes to dress up as a mermaid, and you can find her to deliver a letter to her from Jolene, and she'll give you a wisdom gem. So there are like little side quests like that as well. Unfortunately, I did find the actual sea travel itself to not be very fun to navigate. It wasn't like Wind Waker where you could jump out of your ship, so there wasn't really any random things that you could find whilst sailing the Great Sea. I found the sea travel to just be interim between getting to do the more interesting stuff, but the game also puts in too many enemies and obstacles to allow you to just wait while you sail. You have to be engaged or there's a good chance you'll just die. So while the islands had cool stuff, the sea travel was not it. I was very happy once I unlocked the slate, which is an item you get that allows you to basically like fast travel between the seas. But yeah, if you really like the game, there is a lot of rewarding side content to engage in and find, so that was something that I did think the game did well, especially with the limitations of being on DS. Guys, for once, I don't really have a lot to say about the soundtrack for a game I played. I really liked Linebeck's theme. It's very iconic, and the theme that plays when the phantoms are hunting you down still activates my fight or flight. But outside of those things, there really weren't as many unique tracks in this game that stuck out to me. So yeah, that was a little bit unfortunate. In conclusion, as I mentioned, I really wanted to give this game another try, and I did really want to love this game, but unfortunately, it's just not for me. The simpler puzzles and dungeons, my issues with the sea travel, and the pacing of the game overall just all led me to not really loving it. But I do think that it is a solid game, and had I been a bit younger, I would have really enjoyed it. So yeah, this has been my thoughts on The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.